Blog viewers. Today we're going to talk about courage, and obviously courage is primarily a function of how you approach and deal with risk. A courageous person faces risks head on and doesn't run from them. But not all risks. Even a courageous person avoids certain risks that are unacceptably high, and where the reward for taking on the risk is unacceptably low in light of the risk. This distinction between what I would call prudent courage, where you take on certain risks prudently and wisely, and thoughtless bravado, where you take on every risk thoughtlessly, is sort of an old distinction that you can trace all the way back to Plato and Aristotle, and I think it's an extremely important distinction that each person needs to perfect in their life. So I would argue that humans predictably deal with risks in one of two ways, both of which are very bad. Very few people opt for a third approach, which I will argue is much superior to the two ways that are commonly used to approach with risk, to deal with risk. So what are those two bad ways, and what's the preferred way? Well, one extreme bad way to deal with risk is to live in a way that you never ever are exposed to a life-threatening risk. This kind of person avoids risk at every turn. This is sort of a laudable goal in theory, but it's almost impossible and unattractive in practice to implement. Life-threatening risks are everywhere the second you leave your house. You can drive and get hit by a car. You can get hit even as a pedestrian by a drunk driver. You can get hit by lightning even when it didn't seem like, even on a sunny day where it didn't seem like there would be a storm. There can be obviously earthquakes that strike with no warning. Food poisoning can happen at any point. You could catch some airborne infection that no one had knew about at the time. A tree could fall on your head. Actually, someone died in LA this year when a palm tree suddenly, the top part fell, and this man was standing there and hit his head, and he died. You could go to a club or a bar, and there could be a fire, and you could die of a carbon monoxide inhalation. You could be the victim of a drive-by shooting or a serial killer, or basically be caught in between these people when you had nothing to do with the situation, and on and on and on and on. So you'd have to never leave your house. You'd have to test everything you eat or drink, and to make sure it's not poisonous. And basically, this whole life would create a whole host of other problems. And at any point, at any rate, by then, what quality of life are you living anyways when you're avoiding all these risks? Is this even a human life anymore? This would require an insane amount of attention, focus, and drive to live this kind of way, which arguably could be this risk avoidance mentality, which arguably could be used. This energy could be used better on other things. In any event, there are many unknown risks that even if you were the most diligent risk avoider, you wouldn't know about those things. So those would sort of spoil your plans anyway. Now, the other extreme that's equally bad is to live in a way that you never seriously consider life-threatening risks. What do I mean by seriously consider? You don't change any of your behavior, or you don't take any precautions, or at least have a plan to implement in light of these risks. So you never go to the doctor for a physical. You drive above the speed limit all the frickin' time. You go to Florida during hurricane season. You take trips to remote locations, and you have no idea if there's a hospital or any sort of healthcare nearby. You never read public health articles describing what are sort of new research finding what is good and bad for your health. You cycle without a helmet, which I never do. You associate with people that you know nothing about. These are all basically another way. This is sort of the thoughtless bravado way of living, which is to take on every risk and not to factor risk at all into your calculations. Now, the middle ground, which is the better approach, is to take reasonable precautions against significant, non-negligible, life-threatening risks and other risks of like magnitude. You have to have a plan in place of what you would do in various worst-case scenarios if these risks materialize. Hoping that nothing bad will not happen to you is not a plan, it's the absence of a plan. So you would have to have supplies on hand to assist you in these situations if disaster struck. You should pay attention at all times to your surroundings and what you're stepping on and what you're touching and drinking. Avoid people that habitually assume unreasonable risks. These people are known as daredevils. Avoid situations that pose unreasonable risks. Be extremely wary of travel alone to remote locations. In all these ways, you're avoiding unnecessary risk in a reasonable way. Act in a way yourself that I think you are leaving yourself a margin of error at all points. Wear helmets when appropriate. Wear seatbelts always. Go the speed limit rather than 25 miles over it. If operating a motor vehicle, get it checked regularly, especially the brakes and the tires and the wheels. Don't assume everything will function well forever. Why should it? And anyway, in any event, taking these precautions, leaving yourself a margin of error, slowing yourself down, all of these things improve reaction time, and the margin of error will be higher. And if you hit anything, the severity of the accident will be much lower anyway. So these are all good reasons. I can give an example. I obviously cycle a lot, and as I said, I always wear my helmet because of that risk of head trauma. In addition, I used to cycle up steep mountain roads and then come down them at about 22 miles per hour. While that may sound like a lot, it's actually quite slow coming down a mountain like that, where the gradient might be minus 5 or 6%. You don't need to pedal your bike to go that fast coming down. Gravity's kind of pulling you the whole way down. In fact, I was braking a lot and still going 22. If I didn't brake much, I'd be going about 35. If I pedaled and didn't brake, I'd be going 40. And so I never wanted to go that fast. Why is that? Why did I always settle for a slow pedestrian 22 coming down rather than 30 or 35 or 40? Well, in my brain, the margin of error was way too low at 35 or 40 miles per hour, and the severity of a fall was too high, the severity of the injury. It wasn't worth it. Head trauma is the most severe injury that can happen to your body. It's not a joke. And the reward was small or non-existent, a few seconds of adrenaline pump and thrill compared to a lifetime of dealing with those kind of injuries. So I braked a lot coming down, and I never had any issue. Even if I had lost control of the bike at 20 miles per hour, the fall would have been much less than at 35 or 40. So you have to always think about your exposure and exposure levels to various risks. I would argue that people that are outdoors a lot, which are not most office workers today aren't, but if you are someone that is generally outdoors a lot, you might need to think about your exposure levels to various outdoor risks. Most scary stuff happens outdoors. So in general, for those kinds of people, it seems like a decent idea to try to reduce outdoor exposure somewhat. The chance of any serious bad outdoor thing happening is very, very low. But if you're outdoors all the time, you're increasing your exposure to that risk tremendously. I think also for these kinds of people, you need to learn and entertain and educate yourself while indoors. You shouldn't hate being indoors. Now, in any event, on the deepest level, why is it good to plan for and not assume excessive risk? Was an interesting question. Why is it good to plan for and not assume excessive risk? At the deepest level, what kind of answer can we give to this question that would make us want to be motivated in a way to actually be a risk avoider in a reasonable manner? Because I think you want to make it to whatever age your DNA permits, having as many good experiences as you can in your life. It's simply not worth trading a few minutes or hours of daredevil fun in the now for decades of more serene in exchange for and giving up decades of more serene but still very enjoyable good experiences. It's just not a trade worth doing. Persons willing to make this trade are viewing their life falsely and viewing human good falsely, way overvaluing present thrills and adrenaline and daredevil type varieties, and undervaluing a lifetime of sort of good non-adrenaline pumping experiences that are still very valuable. So those are my reflections on courage and risk for now, and I will continue giving this thought in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye.